We are joined now by Brian Christopherson from Husker 24/7. BC, what's going on, bud?
Oh, not a lot. How are you guys doing?
Be sizzle. Oh, we're navigating our feels over what would you call it, Ravi? Probably since the open practice to close scrimmage to injury reports, we're just back to kind of recalibrating, man.
A lot of pearl clutching going on.
Yeah. Well, it's just interesting.
Really?
Well, kind of. I don't know. I
Not
think,
from us, from other people.
I just think it's interesting how we want like the team to have this culture change and get over this and start here, but like the fan base doesn't want to hold themselves to that same standard, right? Like they need to recalibrate too, because
Yeah.
do you know what I mean? It's like you can't always want somebody else to get better. Like sometimes you have to too.
I feel like this is kind of an annual.
Me
tradition of
too.
the
I would like to stop doing this.
Well, there's early summer is the feel good time. That's when, like June and July, the person who said, you know what, 7-5 would be nice. 7-5 sounds good. And then they're like, actually, you know what? I'd see 8-4. You look at that schedule closely; it's 8-4 at least. So there's that in June and July. But then there is always that moment in early August, and it's usually connected to an injury, which happens every camp because it's football, where someone goes down, is out for the season. There's that headline, and there's fair reason to like, okay, what's the depth chart look like now? But with it, there comes that like, oh man, it's actually here, and a little bit of doubt creeps into the mind, especially when the results haven't been as hoped the last several years. And I think we're probably to that week in our schedule. So it seems like it's about right on my calendar for this, if that's what's going on out there.
Says the guy that's 98 over 65 all the time.
BC, I don't want to make light of Prohaska's injury at all because
I don't either.
You feel for the
I was
guy,
gutted by it.
You feel for the family, you feel for everybody involved. But have you ever seen a fan base go into a ditch quicker over a second string tackle being injured?
It's not just that. It's that I'm not even sure how they felt about him before he got hurt.
Yes. That's kind of, yes.
That's fair because if you go back to last year, I mean, obviously, well, before the season, Matt Rule was asked, you might remember, about Teddy all the time because Teddy was coming back from that other injury.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a lot of intrigue going into the last fall camp, like, oh, is he going to be the guy that takes over left tackle? And there was sort of this, sometimes in the questioning, almost like a forcing, like, this is going to happen, right? Teddy's going to be at left tackle eventually. And I remember Rule, a time or two, said, ever since we've been here, Turner's been the guy we've known at left tackle, like that. We haven't really seen Teddy yet until that basically last August. Now, what was gutting about the injury, of course, is just a great kid for one, but you hate it for anybody, but he had worked so hard to build his body right. And I think there was excitement about, can he be sort of the version of what Ben Hart was last year in his development? So I understand all that. But I think, I do think it's fair to say that I always thought people were kind of talking over Corcoran and others even in the spring a little bit, and how that could be a competition at the very least when we got to fall camp. Because you're talking about in Turner, a guy who's, started, look at his snap count. It's like over 2,000 snaps or something in college football. So, I mean, he's played more than about anybody. So you can't just push someone to the side, even if Teddy were healthy, and say he wouldn't have been a factor in the competition. And I felt like that was kind of happening. So I think your framing of that is accurate. I don't know exactly how they saw it, honestly, or how it was going to play out for sure if everybody was healthy.
Now, this is weird because I have to do the same thing that I'm asking our listeners to do, and that's like recalibrate my expectation levels on the fly, right? So I listen to things like, Little Boodle's playing some corner, Buford's playing some corner, Brett's moves full-time to Rover. I'm like, hey, that's awesome because that field safety spot is getting thinner and thinner, right? You got Hartzog and maybe Boodle that can play over there, and then all of a sudden the young guy's got to play, right? But we hear like we're like, hey, Kobe Bretts. And so that was kind of the thing yesterday. And if anybody wants Kobe Bretts to be successful, it's me, right? Like, like pretty close to KB. And I hear it, and all of a sudden our expectation level changes about Brett's, and rightfully so, because his trajectory is moving upwards. But moving to Rover means that he's playing behind Gifford. So when we're listening and we're disseminating information, are we hanging our hat just on development and progress? Or is it, hey, this is a guy and we allow our level of excitement to get ramped up? Because I think it's more the first part. If we want this program to be successful, we want guys to get better all the time when they're on that watch, regardless of what maybe the end game is necessarily from a playing time standpoint. Right? I'm not so sure. I'd love to be the next man up, but it's still behind Gifford, right?
Right. I do think sometimes when a player gets mentioned, or even if it's tweeted, I put out an X post or tweeted yesterday, like, oh, Kobe Brett's got a name mentioned, and here's the quote. To me, that's a nice step, because we hadn't really heard a coach speak of Kobe much in a post-practice setting. So that's like, okay, he's doing some good things in practice. Now, I think that's where you take information like that and you set it down right there. And then you see what happens from it. And maybe he's going to end up being very important at some point this season. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think what you're saying is accurate. Sometimes there's this, oh, I heard this name, and okay, he's on the 2 deep for sure. Or he's going to do this or that. And that's not actually what is meant by that. They've named a lot of defensive backs over the last week who are young, who are exciting, and there's going to be more of those who pop up as the positions move around, and next spring as well. That's going to happen. That doesn't necessarily mean, like we're going to see Amari Sanders, for example, out there
at
8 games this year.
Yeah.
You never know with injuries or whatever happens, but that's where we got to be careful with that stuff. If you want another one, it's Jalen Graham's stat. Anytime he comes up, and I don't know where to place that one, but that's a huge jump that sometimes I think people overlook from the NAIA to this level. But if they hear Jalen football, or some people take that like, oh man, is he where's he, second string or something? And there's everybody's kind of taking the information in a different way than I guess I sometimes do. Sometimes they're actually right and I'm wrong. But I think it's best to just kind of say that's interesting to hear that name, and then see if you hear it again a few weeks later, or like where does he pop up in week 1, at what point in the game, or at all, that's the stuff that'll give us our confirmation finally.
We're talking with Brian Christopherson, Husker 24/7. BC, it's seemingly one of the other things outside of the Prohaska injury that sent people into a bit of a flutter, as it were, was the fact that Rule kind of came out and made a point of saying that the scrimmage on Saturday was closed. My question for you is, why do you think he felt the need to say something that is always true?
He did get asked about it because there were more signs on the door than usual, at least where we come in, the media. So I don't know.
Good point. And the doors were locked.
Yeah. There was more signage up. I didn't know that it had been closed other practices leading in to everybody, but there was like signs up more this time. So I think it was Sipple, who asked a good question about it. And that's when he gave the answer. So I don't know if it's just because you asked Matt Rule something, he's pretty candid usually. So it could have been nothing more than that. I can't say for sure. But also, to me, it's like crunch time, baby. It's like 6 minutes left in the 6 minutes left.
Crunch time, baby. Cut that up, Shane.
Yeah. You guys know, you're watching a college basketball game. You get to the 6 minute mark. You're like, okay, this is a 3-point freaking game now. It's on. You're
you put the phone down and you lock in.
Yeah. Get hype, BC. Yeah. Get me hype.
Well, there's a time when the kids need to stop trick or treating. It's too dark and you shut the lights off. And so I think that's what That's what I thought when that happened. Is it kind of goes with this time in the calendar too. Like every coach has done it a little differently, but I think back to the Bo era especially, which was always fascinating. And there was a point like around August 10th when it was like, okay, it's on now. Like you could tell, like everything was a little tighter. The answers had a little more bite to them. Everything connected with it was like season 3 weeks away, that sort of thing. So I don't blame them. I would ask you guys, if you were the head coach, wouldn't you do the same thing about this point with the scrimmage? I would, because it's not like you obviously they respect the former players and everybody around here, but you are to that point where I think it's okay to close up the shop a bit. It's our guys now. Let's do this. And we don't need any loose lips sinking ships or any of that stuff. Like, let's just focus on us. And I get it completely. I would probably do the same thing. I got to be honest.
Do you think there's any chance, like, if they're, if they're running a scrimmage and they want to maybe try something, maybe turn something up a little bit, that they, maybe they turn the pressure up on the freshman quarterbacks for the first time, and they don't necessarily want people freaking out because they say, Dylan looked terrible, or Harburg regressed to like he did last year. Like maybe they finally let the defense loose for once.
I think those guys got a chance to be pretty good.
You know what I mean? Like and you don't need unnecessary. Like if they think they're a top 10 defense, they're not going to play a top 10 defense every week, especially not in the first 7 weeks of the season. Like, is there just a chance that they're like, hey, we don't need people running out there and be like, oh God, they threw 18 interceptions in the scrimmage?
Yeah, I mean, it could be. I can't say for sure. There might not have been any giant reason to it, but it might be some bullet points like we're talking about like that, and that kind of makes sense to me. We got a pretty good sewing circle in this state when it comes to like, with football. Like if there's 25 people get in the door, there eventually there's about 200,000 people who have a little bit of a take on what happened in the previous day. So, I mean, I get it. I do. Like, I love access that when we get it, but I know I think you got to be different with former players and high school coaches at times. But I also think those people understand, as who have been in it. Like, okay, there's that point when sometimes you just got to have your team out there and it's just you. And I don't think most people have a problem with that. If it leads to helping them out in any way, or they think that's going to better their cause, or it's going to keep a false storyline from taking root, it's worth it, at this point in the year. I think it's different in March or April. This is, as I say, it's nitty gritty.
BC, you're awfully smart. How checkers and chessy was or wasn't it that Princewell took the podium yesterday after all we've heard about Princewell up to this point?
Yeah, maybe.
Wasn't that interesting? He came up 3 times in previous press conferences.
Yeah, well, he's such a fascinating player, and to hit it on the head, Rule did have that comment where he said, and it was a good challenge for Princewell.
And it started with White a couple of days earlier.
Yeah, if we want to be, that great team, a guy like Princewell, not just Princewell, but a guy like Princewell, everybody understands that, hopefully, is one who turns the corner and is like suddenly wrecking shop a little bit more and has just a little bit more consistency. And that's not knocking his first year. When you heard him talk about like his weight situation, it's kind of amazing. They've got some unbelievable athletes who have gotten stuff done while being undersized in a league we always talk about being full of grown men off the farm, right? Like This is a league of 330-pound linemen sometimes, and Princewell was playing at 230 or under, around 230 he said, and now he's at 245, so that's good. You hear James Williams up there, who by the end of last year, man, he was candid, talked about Maryland game. He said, I had no spring left. And I was like, I need to get to the off season and not have this happen again. He was at like 228.
Jamari Butler was undersized. Javen Wright was undersized.
So all those guys Judy's changed his body. He might be about the same weight, but it's a different weight.
Mhm.
It's different, and we'll see if we how it ends up for this program in the next 3 to 4 years, and if it is really good, Corey Campbell and Tristan Coggin would have to be in the list of top people you talk about, right? I mean,
BC Jalen Lloyd has muscles. Like I can't believe it. I don't know. I say that tongue in cheek. Like, I love him. He's family, right? But he's a little slight guy, and he was still fast. He was still explosive. He walks around now. It's like he has like biceps and quad muscles. It's like he used to have such an aversion and be so fearful of eating and putting on weight because he couldn't jump, 26,000 feet. But now to see him, it's like he feels like $1 million. Tommy Hill played undersized. BC, Tommy Hill was playing at your size.
Yeah, you got guys and walking into Ace Hardware without their shirts on now. They're just feeling good about themselves. But
Ace.
I mean,
a lot of tank tops around campus.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, for guys to buy in to weight gain is not always easy.
It's not. And people should pull up the James Williams interview. If you want to talk about, like, going through it to get your weight right, like, he talks about, with his metabolism sort of fighting him, and like he's got teammates like putting a sandwich in front of him, basically like, so you got to have it, man. And it's not easy, and those guys go through a lot to get it, but it's very hard to dissect sometimes the strength and conditioning and all that from outside looking in. Like, we've for years tried to like form big opinions on if someone's good or bad at it, and I think it's sort of a difficult challenge and sometimes not fair. However, early on, it's hard to argue with the fact that everybody looks way different with their bodies when they come in and do interviews and you talk to them compared to a year ago. It's just easy to see, like, the evidence is right before you. So you have to give the combination of Campbell, Coggin, that whole team, I know it's a whole team involved, a lot of credit in that, and we'll see what it does for the football side of it. But I like how they always talk to as it is a team. Like, it's not just one department here and there's a wall and then over there. They work together on all the numbers, and it's very organized, and people really the players really respect it, and that's what matters.
Who's gonna I'm gonna say this for fear of like being completely wrong if it counts, but the guy that's come up a ton lately is Ramir Johnson, right? Ramir Johnson has been there forever, through a lot of ups and downs. And
year number 6,
he came across a certain way when he was coming out of prep school. You look at his frame. He right now is probably a victim of a guy we think we know too much about, and we really don't, because he looks incredibly different than I've ever. Not only is it the full beard sometimes, and he looks like he's like 60, but he's bigger and stronger and confident. He may be a guy that we think we know the book on, but he's actually a lot different than what the last time we remember seeing him.
Yeah. Very comfortable in his own skin too.
Dude, he's really, really savvy and smart too. Like, dude has done life, man.
Yeah, and I think he knows that this is a staff that respects his work previous to whatever happened in 22, and then obviously the injury last year. Rule had that quote in the spring, which matters a lot. It's like, we've seen what the guy can do against. Michigan State was really good in 21. Oklahoma, look at those games and the yardage he put up and some of the plays he made. And it wasn't just one type of play. He was doing it in a lot of different facets, and he could run between the tackles. And he's just one of those guys who, whenever he's touched the ball in his career, for the most part, pretty good things have happened. He's had good results. I can remember the first time we interviewed him and he was nervous in a tent, under a tent in Maryland. It was when he scored like a touchdown, and that was 2019.
Yeah, and we were knocking him because he wasn't physical enough inside the tackles. I remember.
Yeah. Everybody says he looks different. He does. he's another one that falls in that category. You could probably make a good list, and it could be a good segment to think of, like, who do people think they have the book on that it's not over yet, that it can definitely change it this year. And he's definitely one. Turner Corcoran is one.
I was just going to say Turner Corcoran. I was literally just going to say that.
They kind of, I get the sense, man, the staff kind of bristles up because I think they hear all the grumblings and,
oh, he's got to be a guard. He can't play tackle.
I think they're cheering for Turner more than anybody because I think they're sick of hearing it.
Our guys at Husker 24/7 have admittedly talked about Turner, like, maybe guard is where he takes off. And I think there's a lot of that that's been echoed. But the staff itself, I've never heard that conversation a lot or very much at all, honestly. Again, I go back to the earlier comment. Think of Rule last season. He's like, Turner, we've known him as our left tackle. And so, again, the Teddy news was very difficult for everybody because you'd love that to play out and just whoever is your best to put out there. And Teddy's such a great guy and in-state kid and has worked hard. But, this is Turner's big chance to, meet a moment. And there's some interesting young guys behind him. Gunnar Gatula, I think, is a really interesting redshirt freshman product. And
we forget we forget the random times Roy would bring Segrin up last year. And we were like, our very own.
He's like
an hour 30 away from us. Like him, that guy. Yeah, that guy.
Segrin's got great measurables too. I mean, like if he was 260, I think when he came in, and now he's listed at 305, and it's definitely that comes across. So yeah, I don't know. Ideally, Turner takes the reins this year. Is really solid and is available, and that's the big thing about a line play. Can you stay healthy? It's tough. And to be fair to Turner, I know what the PFF grades are on him and all that stuff. He's played a couple seasons where he hasn't been close to 100%. I don't think either, and I don't think he's ever made a big stink about it. So hopefully he can get close to that, and we see the best of his football this year.
That's Brian Christopherson, Husker 24/7 BC. We appreciate the time as always. We will talk to you again next week.
Always enjoy being on, guys. Thank you.